lately is I've been listening to some experts about authoritarianism and the downfall of democracy. People like Ruth Ben-Ghiat and Tim Snyder, they have been studying this shift from, a downfall of democracy into authoritarianism. And they have looked at it, for decades. They've been looking at how this happens. They've been looking at other countries that were democratic countries, and then their democracies failed. They end up with an authoritarian regime. And there's a lot of warning signs that are happening right now, especially in the U.S. Now, of course, I've been paying more attention to the U.S. than worldwide, but I do think these same ideas are happening around the world. And that's one of the things that they talk about, is this idea of creating a false narrative, trying to elevate these, insurrectionist ideas and say that those are the real heroes, those are the good people, and the people who are fighting for democracy are vilified. And that's what we're seeing here in the U.S. big time. Trump talked about fake news, fake news, fake news, and anytime there was real news that he didn't like, he portrayed it as fake news. And so what we have here in the U.S., and I think it is starting in Canada, we now have two completely separate societies, basically. In the news, they talk about it being like silos, and it is true. We've got this one silo that is grounded in reality, looking at actual, true, verifiable facts, and then we have another silo that have been convinced that right is wrong, that what's up is down, that what's actually true is false. They have created this completely false narrative, but it's verifiably false. You can look at it and it's based on nonsense. It's just weird, but these people have been convinced of that. And so because they have been so convinced that that fantasy world is real, and they now reside 100% in that fantasy world, they can no longer tolerate anybody saying the truth because they are convinced that the truth is a lie. And so, we've got these different silos, and it is terrifying because how do you get these people back into reality? They're brainwashed. I've also heard a few interviews with some people who study cults, and this behavior is just totally cult behavior, where there's just this blind loyalty to a leader. It doesn't matter what that leader says, doesn't matter if what that leader says has any basis in fact or not. That no longer matters. And I don't know how you come back from that. I don't know how you get those people over to reality. And so it's clear that that group wants war. They want violence. They are more and more openly talking about violence and killing people who are grounded in reality. But I'm not sure what their goal is. I don't know what they're working toward. I don't know. They're talking about violence, but why? What would they hope to accomplish through violence? I just don't get it. I think there's a number of things going on. I think, at least in the U.S., and I suspect kind of worldwide, we have for, 40, 50 years, things have been fairly stable in the West. We've had this sort of respect for country borders. We had a respect for the rule of law, that elections mattered, that the people of each country could choose their own own leaders and which direction that country wanted to go. So for 40 or 50 years, we've had that stability in the West. Now, I realize some parts of the country, things were kind of chaotic, but in general, there was this stability. In general, we knew where the country borders were. We knew that everybody kind of respected that. People respected elections, and sometimes you would get a more right-wing government, and other times it would go more left-wing, but it was decided by the people in the country. And I think what happened was the left kind of got complacent. We, and I include myself in this, we made assumptions that was the way it was. It just was. That people just respected the rule of law. People respected democracy. People respected the outcome of elections. And there was, while that was happening, so for the past decades, there was still this right-wing movement to try to diminish trust in elections, to try to thwart that order of things. And those of us on the left, maybe we were just blind, maybe we were complacent, maybe whatever, maybe we were just overly confident, but we on the left basically ignored that. And those people, whoever they were, that movement, I mean, I know some of the names of the organizations here in the U.S. that were working toward it, but I just believed that there were enough good people, and that's not even the term I want, but enough people who believed in the rule of law that that faction would never be able to gain power. And I think it was the complacency of the left, it was the naivete of the left. We did not realize that those forces on the right were working to mobilize, and they kind of just got everything in place. They were taking these steps, and while we may have seen the individual steps, we still believed that people believed in democracy, and we believed that democracy would work. And then in 2016, democracy didn't work. All of a sudden, Trump, even though he lost the election, he was still able to take power. And it was through outside influences. It was Russia, but I think there were also other forces that were at work, and they managed to take power. And all of a sudden, it was like, wait a minute. I mean, I realized that they had been working for years to make that happen, and those of us on the left were complacent, we were blind, we were whatever, and all of a sudden, here it is. And I think that you in Canada are starting to see the same thing. So I don't think this is just an American thing at all. And I don't know how we fight back, because at this point, that group doesn't respect elections. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in democracy. And so I know that that's what we're fighting here. We've got the Democrats in Congress, in the House and the Senate, and the presidency, who are still kind of believing in the rule of law. They're believing in democracy. They're believing that they can use the system as we have it set up to overcome. And I'm not convinced that that can happen at this point. I'm not convinced that our democratic system can prevail when we have these anti-democratic forces gaining power. So they're not concerned about the rule of law. They're not concerned about the norms and laws that are in place to maintain the stability of our system. They will happily go outside the law. They have no belief in the rule of law, no fealty to the rule of law. That whole idea that somebody would do things according to law, to them can is laughable. Like, I mean, all you're doing by following the law and by following the norms and procedures is hamstringing yourself. And they just laugh at it. I mean, they look at our senators and stuff who are saying, but the law says this is how it has to be done, and they just laugh at that. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I realize that's what the law says, but we will do whatever we want to do. We don't care about the law. And so can the law overcome? And that's what I don't know. I don't know.
You think it's an end of the democracy?
I don't know. I think there is very real possibility that it is. I want to say absolutely not. I want to just say that's absurd, but I don't know. I will agree with you that it is the minority, but they are, I mean, they're using terrorism, and I know that, like, here, so, like, one of the big things we're talking about here is the trucker protests up in Canada were peaceful, if you can call it peaceful. I mean, I'm not sure that shutting down the economy and all that is peaceful, but there wasn't shooting and fighting, and, you know, that didn't happen. So in that regard, it was peaceful. They're talking about bringing the protests down to the U.S., but when it comes here, every single one of them will be coming armed to the hilt. They will all be coming with a pistol on their hip, and they'll have 4 or 5 ARs strung across their chest. And the danger factor then escalates exponentially. And so we're looking at terrorism, and they did start off, I guess, with milder forms of terrorism, but they are getting more and more explicit, more and more violent, more and more willing to shoot and kill in order to get what they want. And when that happens, what will be the response? Will the American government push back forcefully, or will they back off? And so far, what we have seen from these groups, when they have done, we've had a few standoffs over the past, 15 years. You know, at the Bundy Ranch, the feds moved in, and then there was all of the physical threat of gun violence, and so the feds decided to back off. They were just like, you know, it's not worth bloodshed, and so they backed off. And then again, these groups took the Meyer Refuge, and again, the feds were like, it's not worth bloodshed, and they backed off. So far, that has been the pattern, and I understand, on one hand, I understand that the government doesn't want to get into an armed conflict with these insurrectionists. But maybe at some point they need to. Maybe at some point that's the only way to stop them. And then the question is, will it actually stop them? Or will it just keep going down that road and get worse and worse? And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it seems like the ideal world doesn't exist. Like when I cycling, when I go myself out of the world and completely isolate myself, separate from the world, and living in the middle of silence and solitude and the endless roads and all over, seems like there exists a ideal world. But then when you come to the reality, when you live in the normal life, it seems like there is no the ideal world. Something is there to screw a situation, and happening all over the world. And it's this we're talking about North America. But then in many places there are situations became unsettled. I'm a very pessimist of what is coming up about the future. I don't see it. I don't know how to change that.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I don't know how we avoid war, and I would hope that people would do whatever it takes to avoid war, but I know that we have that faction on the right, and I agree that they're a minority, but they are a very vocal and a very violent minority. So what do? Do we just do we let their terrorism work, or do we try to stop it? And I think that ultimately is the question. Do we just give them what they want, and then we know that if we give them what they want, they're just going to keep ratcheting it up? We want more and more and more and more and more and more and more. Do we just keep giving them more, or do we try to stop them? And if we try to stop them, it will mean war. I mean, that's exactly what happened with Hitler. As Hitler was ratcheting things up, people were just like, give him what he wants, give him what he wants, give him what he wants. And eventually it got to the point where we ended up with Jews literally being rounded up and murdered. And finally people were like, okay, we have to stop this man. So I guess the question now is, will we let that faction get to that point, or will we stop them before? And I don't know the answer.
Here on the local level, I actually observing with some kind of worry the confrontation between the counter-protester and the protester themselves, without the police putting themselves in the middle, try to, there is nobody in the middle to try to contain some kind of conflict between the protester and the counter-protester. If this situation going to be in the future, to stop the protester with counter-protester, then we see what happened with the armed forces, with the military, with the head of these authorities. Here in Canada, you see Trudeau say, we asking the police to act swiftly and quickly and effectively, but we are not in the power, we politicians, we are not in the power to command the armed forces in order to, like that, something like that. So to be politically correct, I mean, oh no, because we are Democrats, so we cannot do this, democracy doesn't permit us to do this, and then those people actually know what is the play. They play this, and the game is this, and every time when you retreat, when you go back, they actually coming to you, and it's like a go and back and forth, and
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So it seems to me like we now have one side who is wanting to play by the rules. One side who wants to say, these are the rules that we have agreed on for the past 80 years. These are the rules we need to play by. And we have another side saying, why the hell should we play by the rules? We want power. We want what we want. And the rules are just the rules that people, our grandparents decided that we would play by. But, just because our grandparents made that decision doesn't mean we need to play by those rules. And I don't know how we get out of that.
Nancy, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much for your contribution for Omar Global Media.
Okay. Thanks. I'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Listen to this and other podcasts on Omar Global Radio, omarglobal.com. From Quebec, Canada, Omar Diaz reported.